The Steelers signed another free agent in Juan Thornhill. What does that say about their plans for the secondary and the defense as a whole? We discussed that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Alan Saunders. Let's keep it here. We got a lot to talk about. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. More on them later. As before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, the Steelers add Juan Thornhill, free agent safety. Now, for those long-time listeners of the Locked On Steelers podcast, I was a big Juan Thornhill guy back when he was coming out in the draft. I loved Juan Thornhill then. I loved him when he was in free agency before. So for me, this is like me saying, like, I called my shot 6 years ago. Not really. But I think this is a really good fit to give them a third safety option and a better deep safety option than what they've had behind Minkah Fitzpatrick and DeShon Elliott. What are your opinions on this signing and what it says about their defensive plans?
Well, Chris, I covered Juan Thornhill when he was a freshman at Virginia, so yeah, this is taking us both back a little bit. I think
2015.
Yeah, it was on the beat in 2015. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. I think this is a good player. I think this is obviously the replacement for Damontae Kazee. He's younger. I think a bit of an upgrade, a little bit more versatile, a little more thickly built guy, a guy you can put down in the box. Maybe not necessarily like as his permanent position, but you can kind of rotate him around in there and he won't get embarrassed. Probably not gonna like come flying out of nowhere and kill people like Kazee would occasionally, but like other than that, I think this is a nice piece. For a third safety, I think having a little bit of versatility especially is good. And I think he's a guy that could back up both positions as well, which Kazee could not do when he was the backup. Minkah was the backup strong safety.
Yeah, Damontae Kazee, 5'11", 174 listed. Juan Thornhill, 6 foot 205. Definitely some thickness on that man. But I think the biggest thing, even outside of the size, is the ability to play deep coverage. One thing I've always loved about Juan Thornhill from his time with the Chiefs is his ability to help in different coverages. I think he does a really good job keeping the lid on plays. He rarely gets destroyed for big plays. He did give up a couple touchdowns last year with the Browns. But like you look at his time with the Chiefs, he was an asset to them. Now, the thing is, he wasn't a superstar safety. And if you're not a superstar safety, you often don't get paid, big money. But I think he was a significant part of some of their Super Bowl years when he was there. And I think that adding a guy like you said, it gives them that flexibility behind the defense, behind the cornerbacks, to have a guy where they can be a little bit more flexible. Whereas, Terrell Austin, I think a big part of his defense is being able to move guys in the secondary around and disguise things and say, hey, Minkah Fitzpatrick may be lined up here, but he could be over there in a second. But to have that ability, you need to have multiple safeties that can play deep and cover deep without being a major liability. And I feel like that's where Kazee wasn't able to help as much in the coverage. I think that's something that Juan Thornhill can do a bit better at.
Yeah, I mean, they've still got to do it. Like, I think they could have done more of it last year, even though they didn't necessarily have the ideal personnel for it, but they didn't communicate it very well. So I think this will be a test for new secondary coach Gerald Alexander. If they want to do that stuff, and I think Thornhill is a good piece to do it with, they've got to find a way to execute at a higher level than it did last year. I think that's one of the big storylines. Like when we get to OTAs, I think we're going to be talking about is the secondary going to be able to do the things it needs to do to have success with fewer missed assignments than they had last year?
Well, that was the next thing I was going to get to, so I'm glad you brought that up, because you see Juan Thornhill coming in with a good amount of experience. He'll be 30, I think, by the time by like the 6 weeks of the season. Of course, we've talked about Darius Slay coming in. Is this like a bigger part of the plan to just bring a bunch of guys with experience into the secondary that maybe can, because I think another thing that Juan Thornhill has on the side is, at least what I used to study him more closely, I remember him being a disciplined player that was very much, he could play the structure of a defense, not rarely be caught out of position and be able to play to his assignment. I think in addition, like Slay, that's how Slay makes his hay these days. He's not a 4.38, 40-yard dash guy anymore. So he has to be assignment, good on his assignment football. And if Thornhill's the same light here, now all of a sudden, two of the weaker spots of the secondary from last year when it came to assignment football aren't on the roster anymore, and you've replaced them with guys who have the reputations of being stronger there. Is it reasonable to expect that to change, or do you think there could be still some serious hangups when it comes to communication in the Steelers secondary?
Well, experience is good, but it's also going to be new pieces together, and so they'll have to figure it out. But I think it's a clearly different idea than what we see in, say, like the offensive line, where they drafted a bunch of young guys. They want to put those young guys together. They want them to grow together. I think you're seeing the secondary this greater value and experience where it's like, okay, we got two young guys in Joey Porter and Beanie Bishop. That's probably like, I know everybody wants the team to get younger, but like, if you're already having trouble communicating, the last thing you want to do is go throwing rookies into that equation. They're bound to screw it up. So like, I think there is definitely, especially in the secondary, a bit of an emphasis on, let's get some communicators in there, some guys who definitely know what they're doing, and make sure we get the ones we got coached up before we go injecting more youth into that room.
No, I hear that. And I think that's the thing here, is that you bring in veterans to help kind of piece things together and lead the thing. And that's something that the Steelers, I think when they've been at their best in recent years on defense, they've been high-level communicators. And that's a big part, again, of what Teryl Austin brings to the table. I've talked about this before when looking at the numbers. Keith Butler was more about bringing heat, and that was how he was going to win. And the coverage designs behind that were somewhat bland when he was kind of in control of that. Teryl Austin is the opposite. He may not bring the most complex heat, blitz schemes, but he's going to bring some more complex coverage schemes. And I even broke down how one of the touchdowns allowed in the Ravens game was a play where Cam Sutton was had the design and was in the position to fool Lamar Jackson into throwing an interception in the end zone. He was just too slow to get there, and it wound up being a touchdown, but they got the throw they wanted. It was just that Cam Sutton misplayed that situation. The Steelers need guys that don't misplay those spots. And I think that's, again, why Cam Sutton was such a disappointment last year, because if nothing else, he was a guy that used to be a guy who could communicate well and could handle the role well. And I think that's what the Steelers have to hope, is that they don't have any Cam Sutton-like disappointments from any of their signings this year. Juan Thornhill, Darius Slay, Brian Eccles, all these guys that they're bringing in, they need these guys to show that they're savvy veterans that can communicate, keep things together, and keep the plays in front of them without making the big mistakes that allow the big plays.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And I like the guys that got. I think it's a good group, and we'll see if they even draft one here. Like I think they've now got the secondary to a point where it's like, if there's one there, great. But if not, I think I'm okay with Corey Trice, Beanie Bishop, Juan Thornhill being the 5, 6, 7 DBs. Like, that's not bad.
It's not. The other aspect of this, even just outside of current roster construction, is yet again, Omar Khan signs a guy who was cut and will not count against the compensatory pick formula. And that's something that you and I have continued to talk about. It seems like that is a big part of the Steelers' strategy to make sure that they can try to get as many comp picks next year as possible to add to their arsenal in case they want to trade up for a quarterback.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of the plan. And this is another signing that fits that. I don't know how much he's going to make anyway, if it would have been a big deal, but it's been clearly a thing that they were targeting this offseason.
Absolutely. I want to take a break to come back, and we're going to talk about current draft plans and why wide receivers still in play. The Steelers take a top 30 visit from one of the wide receivers I liked in this draft class. We'll talk about that, who that is, and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, a reminder, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. That's 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. And remember, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. That's $200 in bonus bets if you are a new customer who hits on their first bet of $5 or more. Only on FanDuel Sportsbook. Go to FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's flip to Jayden Higgins, the Iowa State receiver that became a top 30 visit for the Steelers this week. Jayden Higgins being a top 30 visit, I mean, the Steelers got to do their due diligence, right? But I do think it's interesting if the Steelers are still considering and looking hard at those first-round wide receivers because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that's if the Steelers are getting Jayden Higgins with their current pick alignment, that's the only place they're getting him. I cannot see Jayden Higgins falling all the way to the third round.
Not to where they are in the third round. Like, it's not crazy that he could get to pick like 70 or something like that. Like, I guess that's not, maybe if they want to move up in the third round, I guess that's possible. I think it's much more likely that you're talking about a scenario where they trade back in the first round, add another day 2 pick. Then it becomes possible, or some other move, because look, I mean, they're doing their due diligence. They're going to look at the players that they like. And I thought Jayden Higgins had a great Senior Bowl, a great combine, one of my favorite prospects in this class. But adding Jayden Higgins to George Pickens and DK Metcalf doesn't make any sense.
It's the three triple down.
Yeah. I mean, it just, unless you're, I mean, not in this offense, especially. Like, DK Metcalf's moving to tight end, I guess. Like, I don't know, like, how else you're going to use him.
Hey, it's all go balls, baby.
This very much feels like, to me, like, okay, what if we traded George Pickens? What would that look like? Oh, okay, here's a way to do it. Not saying the Steelers are pushing for that, but this feels like hey, if this opportunity presents itself, what is the level we're comfortable with? What if somebody offers us this for George Pickens? What if George Pickens demands a trade? It's very possible. What are we going to do? Hey, here's an option. Another guy. If you want those 2 big X receivers, there are only so many in this draft class, honestly, a handful. Higgins, Trey Harris, maybe Savion Williams, although he's a different kind of player.
Yeah.
Domontae Thornton, but he's like a day 3 guy. Like, there's very few of those big sort of X wide receivers. So if you're going to make that move and you really want, and this is what you really want, it seems like this is what they really want, because they traded for Mike Williams to get it last year, and then they traded for DK Metcalf to get it for this year. It seems like that's what they really want. And you think there's a chance, for one reason or other, that you're not going to have George Pickens around. Okay, this is something to look at. I think he's a great player. I'd love to have him. I don't see how it works. It's not immediately evident to me.
So let's throw out Jayden Higgins. Let's look at other guys like Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, guys that we've talked about. You're not as big on Matthew Golden as some other people have at least talked about. But where is, if the Steelers go for a receiver, where do you think is the most reasonable place they would do so in this draft class, considering how they've handled free agency so far?
Round 3 is very possible to me. I think there are good players that'll be there. I think before that, like, there's definitely boards where wide receiver is best player available at a position of need. Where Grant's gone, Harmon's gone. Maybe they don't like Nolan because there's some like character stuff and it's a little bit questionable. So, hey, Buka, like the least questionable character wide receiver in the history of the NFL draft, who plays the school they love right down the road, and
they do love
a very different player than DK and George Pickens, right? So he fits in with the room. So I can definitely see Buka being BPA in the first round, but I think like if I'm looking at what they would want to do, I think the third round is where you start really looking, because I think they want to go D tackle in the first.
Yeah, same here. I've been hammering that home, and I will continue to hammer that home until I see otherwise. Because, in my opinion, that is the priority. That is the opportunity. It's not just it's a unique chance where opportunity meets priority for the Steelers, where this is a really good defensive tackle class, and this is a really big need for them to hit, not just for now, but for the future, where they want to have those guys. So if we're talking about third round wide receivers, are we talking about guys like Jaylen Noel, who's a teammate of Jayden Higgins from Iowa State, Jalen Royals out of Utah State? Are we talking about those types of guys, or are you even talking about maybe some other guys that you'd be looking at as sneakier picks in the third round?
Yeah, a guy like Jack Besh, TCU, I think
fall that far
is a possible in the third round. Probably not to where the Steelers are, but maybe move up a couple picks. Savion Williams, who came in on a visit from TCU, a bigger guy, kind of like another Cordell Patterson, basically. I do like Jalen Royals. I do like Jalen Noel. I wish that Jalen and Jayden would all pick one way to spell their A, vowel D, vowel N names, because they're all different, and I messed it up about 4 times. I got it wrong on the tweet today. And then I think it's like the thing I really like about this wide receiver class, it's not as good as some of the ones that we've seen lately, but I think there are interesting guys if you go farther than that. But yeah, I mean, that's Besh, Noel, Royals, Williams. That feels like the third round options to me. Isaiah Bond might be there. He had a disappointing combine. His stock has really fallen.
Yeah, it has.
I just don't know. Like he is like if you just combined some of Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson's traits. I don't know that they need another one of those. But I think some of the bigger guys, especially like Besh and Royals, would make a lot of sense. Savion Williams makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting guys like that to fit in with what the Steelers are doing right now, because the Steelers can always use a weapon. Now, I want to ask you this, Alan. One thing I explored with Mock Draft Monday this week, I made it a mandatory rule from this past week's Mock Draft Monday. They had to trade back in the first round and then see what they could get with that. And we had the person who won, traded back, got a second pick in the third round, I think, and also a second pick in the sixth round, getting there. Could that be part of the plan to maybe land one of these wide receivers we're talking about? Because a D tackle to me, yes, is still the priority in the first round. But we've been talking about running back, we've been talking about wide receiver, we've been talking about if they want to add a corner or at another position, or quarterback, that could be the spot to get there. And would they want to pass up on the third round at a position like running back, where they kind of need somebody to finish out this running back room right now?
I think running backs are picked where, like, I could see it happening anywhere. This is such a deep running back class. I really like a bunch of the guys that could be there in the third round. I like a bunch of the guys that could be there in the fourth round. I even like a bunch of the guys that could be there in the fifth round. So for me, that one's kind of wherever. It'll be in there somewhere, I'm sure. I think that signing a Gainwell, I mean, it's still a big need, but it kind of makes it a less urgent one. Same thing with corner. I mean, you look at Slay and Eccles, it's like, do they really need a corner? I mean, if there's a good one there, take them. But so I think they're in good shape to not have to trade back. But I do agree that, like, not having the second definitely makes trading back feel a little bit more likely. And I think when I look at the board in the first round a lot, so I think trading back is definitely on the table.
I think it could be. I think it should be, because if trading back is on the table, it opens up the opportunities to get younger in some other positions. And I do think that the second and third round could be a sweet spot in this draft for multiple positions for the Steelers to address. One of which could be also the Steelers doubling down at defensive linemen. But would they need to, considering they have now signed another defensive lineman, since even yesterday when I talked about Daniel Ekuale, who they signed off of the Patriots in free agency, they brought back Isaiahh Loudermilk. So I want to talk about that. Are enough defensive linemen signed right now to just set up first rounder, close the door? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders. Alan, let's talk about defensive line. They signed Isaiahh Loudermilk. Not a big move or anything like that, but it does bring back, a depth guy that they can bring into the rotation. So we'll talk a lot about it in a sec. Let's just talk about it in a group. What does bringing back Loudermilk and adding Equale do for this defensive line that's gotten rid of Larry Ogunjobi? And as we've both agreed, clearly needs a first-round investment into a guy coming in and adding to this roster.
Yeah, I think you're kind of crowded now in the second group, but I think here's what I think they've done. I think Equale is a good enough player that he can start if he has to, and they don't put themselves in a position where they feel like, oh my gosh, no matter what in the first round, it has to be D tackle. Like I think that's what they've accomplished with these two moves, right? Where if you look at if you look at it right now, it's like, okay, basically, the second team is intact. You got Loudermilk, Adams, Leal, and Lowry, right? And then you have, and then you could call Equale the replacement for Larry Ogunjobi, and you have the same basic structure that you had last year. Now, if you draft a first rounder, you move Equale down, maybe trade to Marvin Leal, maybe you cut Dean Lowry, whatever. And now I think you've improved yourself at two spots on that defensive line. So I think they've given themselves the ability to make a nice impact with a first-round pick that could make them better at two spots, but also have given themselves the backup needed to say, if it's not the right deal, go take Ibuka, go trade back, go do something else. They're not locked in to that position in the first round because of what they've done in free agency.
Let's say the Steelers land their guy, whether it be Derrick Harmon or Kenneth Grant in the first round, a top D tackle in the first round, and the rest of this roster is intact and everyone stays healthy. Is this D-line better suited to stop the run than they were last year, or is that something that we're going to have to wait and see because of the youth on this D-line?
I think if the pick is either Grant or Nolan, they're immediately significantly better against the run. Like, because
not Harmon.
Harmon is not, to me, is not as developed as he has the potential to be good, but like I'm talking like day one, like those two guys will be good day one. Grant is just so dang big. Yeah. He's the thing about Grant is that he's an interesting prospect because I think he has some potential to be really great. The tape isn't necessarily really great, but like it's high ceiling, high floor because the worst case scenario, you got a nose tackle. Like,
right.
Who will be a starting nose tackle for 15 years probably. Like, that's the worst case scenario, which is it's not what you want from, 20, about 21 overall, but, like, it's a pretty high floor. And if you can teach them how to pass rush, look out. Like, now you got one of the better defensive linemen in the game. And so that's why I think I think Nolan is obviously not as big, but I think he's a very advanced run defender right now. Harmon's more of like a do-it-all guy. Like, I don't really see any weaknesses in his game, but he probably has a little bit more growing to do. Like a typical defensive line. Like, defensive linemen don't often have big impacts right away. So I think it's a really fair question. Cam Hayward sat 2 years before he played, and that's not unheard of. Like, that's not Milton Williams.
Took time.
Milton Williams, everybody's favorite free agent in this class, didn't start for several years in Philadelphia. And so I think having those guys would right away make their run defense better. I don't know if it's going to help them rush the passer. Harmon's probably the one that has the best pass rush moves right away. But again, like, these guys are very much unfinished products. The bigger you are, I think the tougher the adjustment is to the league because you get by doing so much with just your natural size and strength that you don't necessarily need the technique to dominate at college. So you got to learn it. And I think another reason that you're going to see the Steelers out at these pro days with all these defensive linemen is you got to understand their aptitude for learning. Are they going to want to learn it? Are they going to want to put the work in and go do it? Or are they happy just being bigger than everybody, stronger than everybody? And when they're not anymore, they're going to go, oh, well, I tried. That's the big thing that Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan have to learn about these defensive linemen between now and the draft.
I think that's certainly what you're doing. And that's a big part of what I think Mike Tomlin really enjoys out of this is seeing who enjoys this kind of stuff, who enjoys the misery of the hard work. I think like a perfect example of what you're talking about is someone that relies on their size is Deion Walker. Deion Walker out of Kentucky. We talked about how when he was at the Senior Bowl, he was coming straight up out of his stance, and he was just this mammoth human being at 6'6". But if you got up under him, that was how you beat him, and he let a lot of people do that, and that's why he's
kind of reminded me of the walkers from The Empire Strikes Back, very large, also strangely vulnerable.
just wrap some wire around Deion Walker.
Jalen Warren down there on his ankle, and he's toast.
That's a great comparison. I hadn't thought about that, but to your point, that's what you're talking about there as far as guys, and it does happen a lot. Look. You're trying to win at all levels, right? And when you learn how to win, you lean on that way. But that's something that can work for guys. I think a prime example, not a D tackle, but for TJ Watt. TJ Watt used to just destroy people at Wisconsin with his just explosive burst. He didn't need a variety of pass rush moves. When he got to the NFL, a lot of other guys were explosive and strong and athletic, and he had to develop his pass rush moves to get around them. And that's part of what made him become an elite player was his ability to do that. And I think that's what has to happen if this D-line is going to be better, with these guys. They're going to need defensive linemen that they draft this year to be guys that are willing to quickly learn, quickly adapt, and keep working on improving their game. Because again, like you said, they're not going to be instant shutdown, pass rush, leading the NFL in interior pass rushing. But, I do think there's a way where if it's Kenneth Grant, he could be an instant upgrade in stuffing the run. And stop teams from getting double teams, that chip to the second level. If they can get that, I think that does a lot for what they were going up against and was hurting them late in the season this past year.
And I think the other thing, look, everybody wants to talk about the late season collapse, and yes, it was late in the year, and yes, it was also against some really good teams, but it was also a condensed schedule. So the depth, I think, just like you say, hey, they didn't hold up that well when they had to get down their depth chart, right? When they needed guys to step up, it didn't go that well. So I think that's important just in terms of the number to kind of go back to the original question, why not bring back Isaiahh Loudermilk? He's not going to make that much. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Insulate yourself. Be able to come at people in waves. That's the Eagles' way. It's the way the Steelers are heading, and that's why it's going to be the first round pick.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Alan.
All right,
I'm going to name 5 defensive linemen. I want you to prioritize them as who you think would be the best fit for what the Steelers need right now.
Kenneth Grant.
Well, okay, well there you go. So we'll break 2 through 5 then, because we're taking away Mason Graham. He's not in the equation here. Derrick Harmon, Darius Alexander, Walter Nolan, and Tyleik Williams.
I'll say Harmon. I mean, they're all really good. This is really splitting hairs because they're all really good. I'll say Harmon, Nolan, Williams, Alexander. But they're all really good. They're all really. I really liked Tyleik Williams a lot. I think he's really underrated. I think he should have ran at the combine. I think it was a mistake. I think he's going to fall into the second round because of it, and I don't think that was preordained. But we'll see how he does at the Ohio State Pro Day.
We will see how he does at the Ohio State Pro Day. He's a guy who I love his run tape. When he's against the run, I like Tyleik Williams, and he could be an option where if the Steelers are trading back and they trade so far back that they still want a defensive tackle, if he's floating around there and they somehow wound up with a second round pick, I'd be interested in bringing, like you said, they love them some Ohio State dudes, and they have an old Ohio State dude who's starting to age out. Well, if they got a young Ohio State dude to replace him for the long term, that could be very interesting there. But D-line still a priority despite the multiple signings that they're making. They're filling out their depth chart. The Steelers making other moves here. We'll keep you apprised of all those updates here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, as will Alan Saunders with Steelers Now. Alan, let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work. You're muted.
Saunders_PGH on social media. I'm good.
Yeah, no, sorry, there was a lag. That was my fault. Continue.
Yeah, no, all good. Yeah, @Saunders_PGH on social media. PGH Steelers Now sites account, SteelersNow.com is where you can find my written work. And you can find my podcast, Steelers Morning Rush and Steelers Afternoon Drive, on the Steelers Now YouTube page or anywhere you find podcasts.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critique, same handle everywhere. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, including my Darius Slay film study that came out earlier this week. We'll have a lot here on the Locked On Steelers podcast in the coming days. Keep it here for all your Steelers news right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.